This is further depressing me, I have to say. I was doing the research about this show, and just hearing every point of view, it's making it even more serious. And to think that in the media, it's kind of just brushed over. Only when you hear a celebrity who's been involved in domestic violence that it comes into into mainstream media. They talk about it. So this week it's been in the media twice. For I think Dennis Waterman talked about that, and Natalie, what's her name, who used to be in EastEnders. She has been defending herself why she went back to her relationship, which was allegedly issues of domestic violence there. So this is a huge issue in society.
It is a huge issue, and I think the media, I'm very pleased you've raised that, the media is very powerful in terms of how it's viewed, because what we call things, how we present things, is generally how people will take it. And if in the media things are not named, I'm often intrigued, and I often read the headlines and I think, that's domestic violence, but it's not been said.
No.
It's just been reported as a man doing this to a woman. But actually, if you call it domestic violence, then perhaps people might be more concerned, or they might be more up in arms about what they're reading. And for me, what was truly frightening about the Dennis Waterman incident was, in effect, he sort of said, if you're a clever woman, you deserve to be slapped once or twice, because that's the only way the man's going to get a word in edgeways. But on the other hand, she wasn't a battered woman. I can't compute that, but then that's maybe Mr. Waterman's issue. But the way things are presented in the media is very telling, and I have no doubt that when the programme is aired, because it was part of the Piers Morgan life issue, I have no doubt that it will be accompanied by the requisite music building to a crescendo while he announces his remorse for, slapping Rula Lenska because she was a clever woman and didn't allow him to get his words in. It's about how things are presented, and at the risk of sounding like a mad feminist, you don't have to look far to see that the way things are presented make it seem like domestic violence is actually something that can be explained away. It's the imagination sometimes of vengeful women. There are harridans out there determined to ruin men's lives. And what about the men? It's not an either-or situation. There are women, predominantly women, who suffer domestic violence, and there are men who suffer domestic violence. It's not either or. The position has never been that it's only women. It's always been majority of women. That's what the researcher said, majority of women.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point that out so people don't think, we're here bashing men, because we're not. It's really about the majority of people who are suffering domestic violence.
But the level of fear is different.
Yes, exactly.
Women bash men, but the men don't get very frightened.
Yeah, I think, and while that's not acceptable, that's kind of the reality of the situation in that case.
And that's because of the context, because of the economic control. And
I think there's a lot to be said for that as well. If we're trying to encourage women to come forward, and certainly the ladies that I've seen at Hart Brown, I always encourage them. This is what you do need. Please take the step. And even if you don't want to now, it's very important to get the word out. This is what you can do. If and when you're ready in the future, come back to me, because then we can take this step. So it's all very well us trying to encourage the women to come forward, to encourage them to protect themselves. If the media is giving the perpetrator the opportunity to go on live television and say, I'm ever so sorry, but I accept that while it perhaps from his point of view wasn't particularly bad, I'm desperately sorry and I recognise it was wrong, that apparently is acceptable. And that gives the view, if you like, to the public watching the TV, oh, well, that's all right then. He slapped her and he said sorry, so let's wipe the slate clean.
Let's move on with the conversation.
Let's move on.
Yeah, and I found it interesting that Natalie, whatever her name is, Cassidy, had to go on and defend herself to take her partner back, who had, occasionally or allegedly hit her.
I think there's a very real issue about how women are represented in the media, and that's very much the situation, because she's not the only one who's had to defend herself. Rihanna is alleged to have gone back to Chris Brown. And there's been some real outrage about how she has been behaving when she's seen as a role model. But I think what's important to remember is that when you're on the outside looking in, we can all decide how we might behave in a situation. But when you're in the situation, it's very different. And the way, when you're living in a hostile environment for a very long time, I don't think that actually people can judge things to the same standard that you would do if you weren't in that situation. So I think Natalie Cassidy has said he actually had sought help, and that is one of the reasons why she decided to give him another chance, and also the fact that they have a child together. I don't know the ins and outs of their relationship. If he has sought help, that's very good. I hope it's the right kind of help. I hope it's not an anger management course, because it's not about anger. And let them deal with the relationship as they must. But there's a real issue around demonizing women and making them feel that they have to defend themselves. What I often say to people is, how many people have been on a diet in a room? And you'll get hands going up. And I'll say, well, how many of you have been on more than one diet since then? And you get a few more shameful hands going up. But that's just food. How much more when you've linked your life to someone, you've mingled finances, you live in a home together, you have children, you have shared friends, you have built a life together, and then the state comes along and says, what this person is doing to you is wrong. You have to leave straight away. How can you? How can you be expected to go straight away? Nobody goes on a first date, gets a slap, and says, I'll be back for some more of that. It doesn't work like that. And so I would be interested, the people who say, well, the men who experience violence, interestingly enough, it's usually physical violence that they're referring to. And I'd be interested to know how much of that was about retaliation. Because I would say, from my own experience of dealing with a lot of cases, that most women at the beginning will respond to the violence. But what happens is when the police arrive and accounts are being given, they can be very different.
Yeah.
They can be very different in the account that's given. So actually the perpetrator who began this whole thing comes across as looking really quite innocent in the whole thing, whereas actually what the police are dealing with is a counter-allegation where a woman has actually tried to defend herself against violence that's been perpetrated, but she ends up being arrested because the perpetrator says, well, look, she got a knife. But actually when you look at the disparity in size, when you look at what's been going on in the context of that relationship, when you look at how things have come to a head, then you might think, well, actually, she really was just defending herself here. But because we are limited to looking at things in that instant, that one incident, it becomes very difficult to do that.
Yeah.
Would you bring into that conversation the case of the poor wretched woman who was trying to bring a rape case against her husband, withdrew under the most extreme pressure from him and his family, and was then jailed for having misled the courts, and I mean, I think that was the ultimate example of what happens. You know, the sort of pressure that women are subject to, and the way that our system is just unable to cope with it in a proper way.
For myself, reading about that, I found it just very frightening that actually, with all of the work that's been going on, still, in essence, she falsely retracted a true allegation. That's what she did.
Yeah.
It really happened, but she retracted because of the pressure that she was under as a victim of domestic violence. But once again, it just fuels that whole discussion about how women are vicious harridans trying to ruin men's lives and make up false allegations. Obviously, if you train a camera on anything, you will find false allegations. I wonder how many false claims of insurance there are. You know, if we were to begin to look at that, I suspect we'd find many more. But actually, when you look at it, the number of false allegations, for example, in rape, is under 10%. But when you hear it presented in the media, it makes it seem like 1 in 2 is a false allegation.
Well, it's a lot harder to produce a false allegation than a true one, isn't it?
Do you get those kind of cases, Kate, where the abused retracts their statement and you have to end the case?
We do. I have to say it's not particularly common, but it does happen. And you may have a client who will come and see you, who and this much more prevalent when I've worked in other firms where we dealt with legal aid. At Hart Brown, we don't have a legal aid contract, but where I've dealt with them and they've had the availability of representation, and they come in, they give their instructions, you prepare the application for them, and there are times when the clients will ring you the day you're meant to be in court making the application and just say, Kate, I'm not coming. They don't give any reason for it, but they back down because of the pressure they're under, or because a lot of the time, perhaps because of the perceived pressure they're under. And that all comes back to the control that the perpetrator has over them. They don't need to be standing there every minute of the day. It's the perceived outlook because of what has happened in the past, be it mental, physical, emotional. If I do this, I know that I will protect myself, but what if he still comes after me? And perhaps it's worth just saying for the listeners that when you have a non-molestation order, if it is granted by the court and there are risks of significant harm and the judge is satisfied to make the order, which happens frequently, the order brings with it a criminal offence to breach a non-molestation order, and that has changed over relatively recent years. Beforehand, it didn't used to be, and it used to have attached what's called a power of arrest, meaning that if you rang the police, they would come and arrest him. It is now actually a criminal offence to breach it.
Okay.
So if they do breach it, they then come into the criminal process. But a lot of the perceived pressure for clients is that even if that's the case, I don't think he'll care. He'll risk it anyway, because they have this perceived idea of, you go and do that, love, because I don't care. I'm still going to come. I'm still going to harass you. I'm still going, if that is the case, to threaten you, to be violent. And it's the entire history of it that somehow needs to be dealt with and needs to be remembered. Like when we were saying that the CAFCAS officer said, well, let's not look to the past. We do need to look at the past in order to get to the future.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually a very well-founded fear, because I think it's a bit more than perceived.
Yes, I
think
agree,
it's a very well-founded fear, because she's been in this relationship. The perpetrator has told her repeatedly, if you leave, I will kill you. I will kill the children. I will kill myself. I will do this to the pets. I will cut off your money. He's told her over a period of time what will happen if she makes any steps to try and evade his control. And so many people have this idea that victims of domestic violence aren't thinking. They're not people who think things through. They just go with the flow. They're just victims. Actually, I think they're very sensible people who, in the face of a very serious threat, because they're living with this perpetrator, they know what weapons he has. They know what weapons he has access to. In the face of a very serious threat, they make the best decision they can for safety, because most women, the majority of women who are killed either at the point of leaving or after they have left. Because if you are a perpetrator, your control is well and truly challenged when the person leaves. So you have to do something pretty epic to get that control back, which is why most of the murders happen at the point of leaving or after the woman has left. So when she comes to the crossroads and she's thinking, if I take this step of either going for a civil remedy or a criminal remedy, this is likely to happen, and I don't have the things in place yet to protect myself, then maybe I shouldn't do it just yet.
Yeah.
And so you find a lot of women who actually may have already understood in their minds, have made up their minds to leave, but just not yet. But in the meantime, the violence continues, so the police continue to be called and things like that. It's not that they don't know what's going on, they're just biding their time. They have to get things ready, because it's difficult to leave and start again without anything. Something as basic as your passport. You have to make arrangements to get that out of the house. Otherwise, what's going to happen to your passport, your children's passport? You have to arrange schools for them. You have to have money in place to be able to survive. If you're going to go on state benefits, you need a period of time for it to kick in. There are so many things to think about that looking from the outside, it might look like the woman is being passive, but actually, she has to think things through, because if she goes unprepared, the chances are she will have to come back.